Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with Theo Ushwood, political journalist and broadcaster, and Kezia Dugdale, director of the John Smith Institute at the University of Glasgow. Welcome and great to see both of you. So to the front pages then, let's catch up with those, shall we? Starting with the Metro, which leads on the trial of the security guard accused of plotting to kidnap, rape and kill TV presenter Holly Willoughby. Daily Mail also leading with the accused security guard's plot, saying he allegedly assembled a restraint kit, including handcuffs, metal ties and chloroform. The coverage continues on the front page of The Mirror with Gavin Plum's alleged plot to knock out the TV star and her husband with chloroform in a night raid at their home. Meantime, the election takes the front spot for the Financial Times, which reports on the Tory and Labour pledges to improve public services, essentially underfunded, or unfunded rather. The Eye also leads on the latest election event and that both parties refuse to rule out 10 tax rises. Front page of the Times, Labour would introduce a full ban on conversion therapy if it wins the election. The election betting scandal continues in the Telegraph, with Scotland Yard accused of revealing the identity of those suspected of gambling on the election date. The Daily Express leads with Princess Anne being hospitalised with concussion following an incident with a horse. And on the front page of The Guardian, low wage growth has pushed 900,000 children, the paper says, into poverty. Well, a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch our guests. So let's go to Theo and to Kezia. Welcome to both of you. And a number of the newspapers picking up on the Institute for Fiscal Studies and this conundrum of the need for spending on public services, the promises that have been made and the how the money is spent question. Kezia.
So I think this is a great story, and the Institute for Fiscal Studies deserve a great deal of credit for putting some realism into this election campaign, and I think it shows the real value of having academics focused on the detail. And what Paul Johnson from the IFS is basically saying is these two main parties, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, their manifestos don't stack up to the extent that their promises aren't funded. And you, the public, need to know that, you need to understand that. And he says the consequence of that is either there will be additional tax rises, or public services will have to be cut, or we have to live with increased borrowing and debt for a longer period of time. And hopefully this will ignite a bit more of a fiery debate in this election, which we've so far lacked, I think.
Yes, the trilemma, as he put it, certainly. Yeah, really fascinating to hear some of that detail. And the smaller parties, you know, in his sights as well, to be fair, picking up on Reform and the Greens, who've made massive promises, for example, saying effectively that poisons the political debate, the sort of the numbers they're talking about.
It becomes a have-it-all election, doesn't it? And if you have Reform and the Greens coming in with these big pledges that amount to billions and billions of pounds of unfunded tax cuts, Reform talking about raising the income tax threshold to £20,000, it becomes very difficult for the main parties to act responsibly in setting out their plans, because they're always finding that they have to try and price match the impossible. And we know that there are £20 billion of spending cuts coming to unprotected departments, think courts, think prison service, think transport, local governments as well. And Keir Starmer has found himself in the same conundrum as Rishi Sunak, and on the one hand, wanting to be fiscally prudent, not wanting to give anybody the impression that he's not going to take the necessary tough decisions when it comes to managing the economy, but at the same time trying to recognise and level with people that actually this is going to be really difficult and that he doesn't want to ask any more of working people in terms of increasing taxes, and that's why he's created this triple lock, matched the Tories on that, and included corporation tax on that, not to increase the main taxes, but at the same time, he said, and he's saying the same as the Tories on this, debt should be over the course of the forecast falling as a share of GDP. So where does the money come from? So Keir Starmer's saying, well, he wants planning reform, he wants to increase our ties with the European Union, or certainly take away the barriers in order to get economic growth. But that isn't the same as taking a tough decision when it comes to borrowing more money or increasing taxes. And that's something that Paul Johnson has tried to zone in here with the IFS and this report.
Yes, and there we go. Tax lock, arms race damaging in the FT. IFS says tough choices ducked. And if Labour doesn't get growth, you know, they're in a pickle, aren't they? Isn't that the point of what we're hearing here?
I think it's fair to say that Labour are hinging a lot on achieving that economic growth. So I think in the early days of a Labour government, you will see a very heavy effort to try and deliver some of the reforms necessary to deliver that growth. So Theo's already mentioned that planning, a lot of this hinges on liberalising the planning regime to allow Britain to start building again, to allow that investment to flow in. I think, though, we should credit Rachel Reeves for the amount of work that's gone into the Labour manifesto and how much effort they've put into not having unfunded manifesto commitments there for people to read or to see, because that's what cost Labour the 2019 election campaign, was a manifesto full of things that didn't stack up. So they'll be keen to avoid that again, which is why you have that small c conservatism running through much of the Labour manifesto.
In the meantime, we'll go to The Guardian. Low wage growth, which we've all known about during the cost of living crisis, and, you know, the difficulties people have of paying their bills, has pushed 900,000 children into poverty. You know, heading towards 1 million children now. Theo?
Yes, I think the backdrop to this is a report by the Trade Unions Congress, and it's found that over the past 14 years, an additional 1,350 children a week in households with at least one working parent has been dragged into poverty, and the prospect of more children being added into poverty is going to get worse over the course of the next 5 years with Labour in charge. As I said, the backdrop to this, and this is where I think it's going, where Paul Novak, the General Secretary of the TUC, is going with this, is trying to get Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves to change their position on the two-child limit when it comes to child benefit. Of course, Keir Starmer has said that, and this is, again, speaking around, you know, trying to create the narrative that Labour will be prudent with the public finances, that he's not willing to reverse a decision originally taken by the former Chancellor George Osborne to impose that two-child limit on child benefit. But there will be pressure now on Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves from the left of the party, namely the TUC in this case, to actually relax that. And just worth mentioning, over the course of the next Parliament, an additional 670,000 children are going to be put into poverty if that two-child limit remains in place.
Kezia, this is, I mean, also the SNP have been pushing to change this, I think, haven't they, as well? But, you know, what's your view on this?
So I think, hurrah, finally we've got a story about the levels of child poverty in this country in the election campaign, because it's taken us 4 weeks to get to this point. I think, from my perspective, the election's been far too dominated by issues to do with immigration and not about some of the core issues that are really fundamental to the future of our country, like the extent to which we have child poverty and young people suffering as a consequence of that. This is really, really difficult issue for Labour, because they're not going to change their position between now and the 4th of July. Rachel Reeves has said she's unlikely to change her position on this for the first, perhaps, 2 years of a Labour government, because she's inheriting those Conservative spending commitments. If Labour are going to win and win big in this election, the pain in the party will come quite quickly from their backbenches, from groups like the TUC, from all the child poverty organisations in the country, the Resolution Foundation being another one who've highlighted that reversing that two-child cap is the single biggest act you could do with power to lift children out of poverty. So the pressure on Labour, regardless of the size of the majority, is going to be immense to make that move. And I suspect they'll hold tight for a long time, actually, on that, because the last thing Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are going to want to do is break promises and send any jitters through the market when it comes to their spending commitments. But this is where the trouble is going to come for Labour in the coming weeks and months.
It's interesting, isn't it, how long, if Labour wins, this honeymoon of patience will last for, and what issues will start to break it. And you're suggesting it's this one.
And there are other tensions as well. So bear in mind that there are going to be elections in the Scottish Parliament. There's going to be elections in the Welsh Parliament in less than 2 years' time from this point. That is an unfortunate set of timings, because if Rachel Reeves sticks to her spending plans for 2 years, people might not see the benefits of a Labour government immediately. They'll not want to inherit that political backdrop going into those devolved elections. So it's possible that this might have to move in order to secure Labour's hopes both in Scotland and Wales. I certainly hope so, but we're a long way off that development, I think.
Yeah. Let's go to the Telegraph, shall we? The accusation that it was Scotland Yard who leaked the names in this so-called Tory betting scandal. What's the suggestion here?
So this is a source close to the Cabinet Office has said it was suspected that the identities of the Conservative candidates and officials had been leaked from within the Metropolitan Police, which is, of course, the largest police force. This is the betting scandal, which has, of course, continued to engulf the Conservative Party, where we've got 2 candidates in the general election have been named as being implicated and now under investigation by the Gambling Commission for placing bets on the date of the general election, and then another further 2 officials as well. And there seems to be, behind the scenes now, some recriminations because they're looking, the Telegraph is reporting that they've been told by a source that they're blaming the Met for leaking the names of those individuals. And of course, they've investigated. The Gambling Commission would be aware of who they're investigating, but they don't think it's the Gambling Commission who are leaking the names. They think it's the Metropolitan Police. And there is a Metropolitan Police officer who is under investigation as a result of these inquiries into who's placed bets and potentially profited from that insider information by placing bets where the odds were quite long on a July general election.
Yes, I suppose people pointing out that if it was going to go before the summer holidays, children at private school break up on the 5th of July, the only date was the 4th. But how damaging, just quickly, Thea, do you think this is for the Conservatives, when it comes to polling?
I mean, it seems to be almost like a sort of Mexican firing squad that everybody's gathering around and looking and saying who's to blame for this leak. And going by this story in the Telegraph, it seems to be that the sources connected to the government, whether that's a Tory source or not, then the paper doesn't specify as pointing the finger at the Scotland Yard. The source said Scotland Yard was officially informed of the date. I'm just quoting the paper here, of the election prior to the Prime Minister's public announcement for logistical purposes and to ensure security was in place at the start of the campaign. It also claimed that the Gambling Commission passed on the names of suspects to the Metropolitan Police prior to the identities being made public in leaks to the newspapers and the BBC, with police informed when the inquiry was launched by the Commission.
OK, can we go to the Times? I know you probably want to come in on that one, but the conversion therapy is to be banned by Labour. We've got a statement from Annalise Dodds, I think it is. But anyway, what's this story about in the Times?
So this is a really strong commitment from Labour, actually, and it's quite bold to see this so close to polling day, given how adverse the party has been to really enter into the cancel culture wars of late. A really strong, firm commitment from Labour that they will ban all forms of conversion therapy. That word all is important because it will include conversion therapy that might relate to transgender identity, which takes us straight to the Cass review, which is all about what is and isn't appropriate to teach young people about gender and sex and how to, I guess, compute or analyse how they're feeling, what that means about what their future identity might be. What's really interesting, I think, about this story is we actually have a comment from Hilary Cass saying she agrees completely with the idea of banning conversion therapy. The principle of it is sound. The practicality of actually writing the legislation, however, is a bit more complicated.
Yes, and Annalise Dodds, the Shadow Women and Equality Secretary, saying tonight Labour has been consistently clear that so-called conversion therapy is abuse and there is no other word for it. After 6 years of delay, the Tories have broken their promise to ban these damaging practices. Labour will deliver where they failed by introducing a full trans-inclusive ban on conversion practices, and that ban won't cover regulated counselling, psychological support or conversations within families.
And let's remember, this isn't really a story about trans rights, although that is a small component of it. What this is ultimately about is the idea that you can somehow try and cure young people for being gay. That could have happened to me as a kid. The idea that somebody might have come into the school and told me I couldn't love the person that I love. And therefore, this idea that a Labour government will outlaw that practice of trying to cure people for their sexuality, I think is hugely welcome. It'll be very important to get the detail of this right. Labour will be very alive to that, not least because of all the controversy that's been around gender and sex-based rights recently. This is a really strong and welcome commitment from Labour.
OK, lots more still to come in the next part of our programme, including Buckingham Palace, saying that Princess Anne is in hospital with minor injuries. We will hear and discuss that more in just a moment.
Behind that door.
Well, what are you hearing?
A summer election, July 4th of July.
We will be live.
Inflation, the cost of living crisis.
He's repeatedly said
It's projected to go higher.
absolutely certainly.
Now is the moment.
The optics, the decision, the gamble.
All of that will be in play.
The question, of course, is...
Are you happy he's called an election?
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
And I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Theo Ushwood and Kezia Dugdale. Welcome back, both of you. Kezia, you lamented the fact this election has been too much about about migration, but there is a front page story on exactly that, isn't there, in the Telegraph, or the front of the Telegraph at least?
There is, and this relates to interviews that both Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak gave earlier today to The Sun, or to the presenter of The Sun, who had a TV channel, and they were both grilled on immigration issues quite heavily. And in the closing minutes of Rishi Sunak's contribution, he basically spoke to this idea that lots of people want to cross the Channel to come to the United Kingdom, but they're all waiting for a Labour government because it'll be so much easier to arrive here and stay here. It was a really pretty cheap blow. It fits very neatly with a lot of what the Conservatives have been doing on their social media channels. It fits very neatly with Nigel Farage's platform for this election, and I think it was pretty unbecoming of a Prime Minister to kind of go there in the final minutes of a TV debate debate.
Because without Rwanda, there's no deterrent. Is that the sort of point, do you think?
I think that's the point. I think, and if you look at just to mention those social media adverts, Conservatives did an advert up where they had sort of Labour rolling out the red carpet on the beaches for migrants who were crossing the channel. And the quote from Sunak, and it felt a little bit like, because I was there and I watched this, and it felt like a little bit like in Rishi Sunak's head, the cogs were turning. Shall I say this? I know somebody wants me to say this. Am I right to say this? OK, I'm going to say it. And he turned around and said, they're queuing up in Calais waiting for a Starmer government so they can come here and stay here. And it just felt like a slightly absurd statement. It didn't fit with a man who had 18 months ago stood on the steps of Downing Street and said he'd preside over a government with integrity and accountability, that somehow he would resort in desperation 10 days, 12 days out from this general election to try and land such a blow on Keir Starmer in front of an audience he would presume might think that there was somehow some credibility to the argument that you could see migrants there drumming their fingers on dinghies waiting for the election on July the 4th suddenly to hop in and cross the channel.
It's not Rishi Sunak's, it's not his chosen path of politics.
I mean, if I'd been watching that debate and it'd been Boris Johnson versus Keir Starmer or Liz Truss, I wouldn't necessarily have been surprised to hear that come out of their mouths. With Rishi Sunak, having watched Rishi Sunak for the past 18 months, it was a bit like it sort of jarred because he didn't seem like he really meant it. It felt like he just sort of had to say it because somebody had told him that was a cool thing to say.
Kezia, I want to get to Princess Anne, if that's all right. In hospital after a horse accident is how the Daily Express said. Concussion, minor head injuries, doing well, waiting to find out more details, I guess, aren't we?
Yes, and what a trooper Princess Anne has been in recent weeks, covering for both the King and indeed other royals. It's an interesting story, this, because we all know that she's a great equestrian. She's been an Olympian. We assumed, I think, when she was reported as having had an incident connected to a horse, that perhaps she'd fallen off a horse. That's not what appears to have happened. She seems to have been walking at her home estate in Gloucestershire, and that she's somehow come into contact with a horse because her injuries are consistent, perhaps with a horse's head or a horse's legs. We haven't got the details yet. Important thing, though, is that she's recovering well. Yes, she has concussion, but there's nothing to be alarmed about with this story. She's very much on the mend.
OK. Quick thought about football, given, Scott's here, I'm so sorry, and I'm an English, I presume, I don't know. But, yeah. Rice and Shine, Declan backs Sleeping Lions to awake at last. The Eye suggesting it's third time lucky. The Times suggests that England's players have urged Gareth Southgate to let them loose against Slovenia. They've already got through. It's just who they face now, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And of course, if we win the group, England wins the group, then we're going to miss the Germans. We'll probably play the Swiss, but they're looking quite good, aren't they? So, given England's form, I think it's a bit of a toss-up about who we play. But yes, there's been a huge amount of criticism of Gareth Southgate, of the tactics that he's deployed, and there's sort of, I think the footballing sporting press have been urging him to be more liberal and let England actually let the likes of Saka and Kane and Bellingham and Foden play as a team rather than this very rigid format that Gareth Southgate has in mind for them. OK,
we will discuss Scotland a bit later on. Sorry, we're all rooting for Scotland. Anyway, lots more still to come in the next part of our programme. Thank you so much for now. Theo and Kezia, thank you. Here's the weather now. Well, the UK recorded its highest temperature of the year so far. Some parts will turn even hotter over the next few days. North West Scotland, western parts of Ireland, Northern Ireland have a rather dull, damp start tomorrow, that it is mostly fine elsewhere. If cloudy in parts of the north and west, expect some fog patches in the south too. England and Wales look mainly dry and sunny through the morning, cloudier elsewhere. Expect a little patchy, drizzly rain in the far west for a time, and a scattering of showers from eastern Irish counties up into north-eastern Scotland. It will be hot, though, away from the north and west. Well, our press preview continues in Sky News at 11. A court hearing details of how a security guard is alleged to have plotted to kidnap and rape TV presenter Holly Willoughby.